Good morning, everybody. Welcome to our meeting. I'm recognizing, I'm not sure what your screen looks like, but starting with Mike Tengler, representing the town of Colony, Tony Luisi, our board chair representing DC, Jessica Otney-Mahar representing TNC, Elaine Chinian representing State Parks, Steve Rice, our citizen member, Harvey Alexander, another citizen member, Nancy Pearson, another citizen member, Brad Glass representing the city of Albany, John Brust, another citizen member with a smile on his face because the coffee's probably done brewing. I think that's it for now. Okay. All right. Let's get started.
All right. First order of business is consideration of the minutes from June 17th meeting, which were included in the board packet in draft form. Does anyone have any comments on those draft minutes? If no discussion, can we get a motion to approve the minutes?
I'll approve.
Second.
Right. Was that Elaine with the motion and Brad seconding? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, motion carries. Let's move on to comments from the public.
If there's folks from the public that wish to speak, you just put your name, and if you're on the phone, just put your phone number in the chat. We probably can just use your name. So if you do that, then we would know. I do know that we have Penny Vavura here from the Friends group, I believe. Yep. Good morning, Penny.
Good morning. Thank you so much for the invitation. Always love to be here and report out on the activities of the Friends. So we have a few things going on. We started to commit to and attend public events representing the commission. We'll see how that goes, but it's great to be out and safely be amongst the public talking about what's going on. We also have some great news on the financial front. We were able to secure a $2,500 grant from 3M to secure additional TOEI bird, Neil help me, tags to help track migration. How was that? I hope that was okay.
Yeah, it's basically it's a super modern version of telemetry for birds.
Perfect. We have some other events coming up from our social committee. September 18th, we have a social at Wolf Hollow Brewing in Glenville. On October 12th, we have a tentative date for a presentation by Tyler Briggs on the prescribed burn that he participated in down at Gettysburg. And then on November 16th, we have the next entry in our book club, which has been going really well so far. So if anyone is interested, it's The Fox and I by Catherine Raven. So please feel free to look for the link. It'll be a Zoom link for that discussion on November 16th. The other big news that we have in activities is on September 28th, when the Friends and the directors will be getting together for a retreat to discuss not only planning into the next year, or both of our next years, but years to come, and talk about what we want to do as far as board cultivation, recruitment, diversity, all of those good things, as well as funding and program priorities. So that's what's going on the Friends front.
Great. Thank you, Penny.
My
I'm just
pleasure.
just checking here, Tony. Nobody in the chat record.
Okay.
And I looked at the attendee list. Nobody had put their name in. So
Okay.
we'll go back to sharing screen here.
Sounds good. If there are no other comments from the public or raised hands, then our next order of business, just running through here, are reports. I don't have a formal report, but I do want to take the opportunity to commend Chris and Lisa and the entire team regarding everything you've been doing with respect to keeping staff and visitors safe during the pandemic over the last many months. including the flexibility exhibited over the last several with the changing policies and requirements, and some of which we'll talk about later in the meeting. A lot of time and attention has been placed on these issues in order to make sure that public health and safety are realized. So I just want to commend all of you for the continued hard work and time that you're putting into these issues. So, and that's it.
Thanks, Tony. Appreciate that. It's always something new almost every week. Are there any reports from board members? No? Okay. From me, Lisa and I are both very happy this morning because we got a message about an hour ago from the management and budget folks in DEC that our 5-year contract, our new 5-year contract, which started April 1st, has now been approved. So that means it was signed first by the Attorney General's office and it is now signed and approved by the Comptroller's office. So that's the final step for approval. Now vouchers can come out and we fill out the vouchers and we can actually get our funding to move. So that's a positive thing. Pointing you to take a look, if you haven't looked already, the media articles that Patty sent out a little earlier this week. There's a lot of press that got picked up on the release of the Carner Blues that we did in July, released 289, I think, a little under 300 butterflies in an area that we've restored. The area was actually purchased with funds from the Recovery Lands Acquisition grant through the Fish and Wildlife Service that also moved through DEC. We worked to restore that. Neil worked with Dylan on our staff to again have Carner Blues captured here, brought to New Hampshire, lay eggs, and then bring those caterpillars or the pupa back here to hatch out, and then we released them on site. We had a lot of press on that. It was a good event. And thanks to Wendy, too, for getting that information out to the media because it got picked up a lot. Along those lines, there's a lot of press on the rare plant, the Virginia marble seed that Jesse Hoffman, our preserve steward and botanist, located. And he's going to talk about that under our presentations. It's pretty neat stuff. Let's see, what else? Number of things in the update. Lots of things in the update. I won't go over them all, but it's nice to welcome back a lot of our volunteers. In the Discovery Center, we have our volunteer docents back. Many of them that we had before have come back, and we've recruited new ones. Thanks to Vicki Studley, our visitor services specialist, and Jody Nash, our volunteer and community engagement specialist. We have 4 new ones and 4 returning, 8 total. And we've been discussing internally, looking at the Discovery Center if we can add more hours. Currently, we've been open since August of last year when we reopened. As the pandemic kind of reduced a bit, we were open Thursday through Sunday. We're considering opening more days. We're not sure what they're going to be. It could be Tuesday through Sunday. It could be Monday through Saturday. We're kind of looking at numbers and seeing what we can do and make sure that we have enough staffing. One of the problems we're finding, like everybody else who's trying to hire, is we're having a problem hiring our seasonal educators, which usually help out with the center. And we don't have interns either. So, but that's coming. Lots of other things in there. The Pine Bush Perspectives photo exhibit. Those submissions are still being accepted. We have our Carner Kids Film Festival. Those submissions are being accepted through October. Education programming, last quarter, we still hit over 350 kids. And I was talking to Jackie Citroniti yesterday, our lead educator. We've got schools calling, but almost every school that's calling wants to do it virtual, which is still to be expected. But we're moving along. In science, take a look at all the work that happened this field season with our seasonal conservation science staff that are managed by Dylan. Lots of stuff. We brought back our bird banding program, the MAPS bird banding, MAPS, which is monitoring avian productivity and survivorship. It's a continental program throughout North America where folks band birds, and it helps us understand how these birds move, how they migrate. And on a local level, it helps us understand how our habitat management supports these species. So that's pretty neat stuff. Fire this year. We burned a little bit last year in March, right before everything shut down. And we were suspended using any prescribed fire in the preserve last year. We started back up this year. Tyler Briggs and his crew and a lot of our volunteers working with the Rangers at DC. We burned almost 240 acres so far. Looks like maybe next week is a possibility. Once we get some frost, probably more so. So that's good. There's some information about the grant that we received from the Forest Service. We'll talk about that when we get to the budget under resolutions. And then finally, in that update, take a look at some of those photos of that 46-foot long bridge that Jesse Hoffman and his stewardship, working with Joel Hecht, their stewardship seasonal team, some of the fire folks, some of the other seasonals have helped put together. So it's basically rerouting a trail in the Great Dune area, the Yellow Trail, off the power line. And it actually makes use of the historic Palatine Road. So that should be open, well, soon. It's a lot of work. 46-foot long bridge is a big bridge. And I think that's it for me, Tony. Yeah.
Great. Thanks, Chris.
Chris, one comment. We fired up that area over by my office, Washington Avenue Extension, at the beginning of the year. The recovery is remarkable. I mean, plants are, or the vegetation is 4 feet high and covers the whole place. It's just always remarkable to me how quickly the pine bush recovers after a fire event.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Like, I can look out my window and look at Indian grass that's probably 6 feet tall. And that was burned in April, all the planter beds. It's part of our training that we do with the DEC Rangers. And you would never know.
Yeah.
It does what it's supposed to do, right?
Yeah, exactly. It's good to see the program working like that.
Yeah. I mean, we help out a lot of folks across the Northeast with their fire programs because, it's kind of a specialty niche, but they come here too, and it's an important program that we have, or an important partnership that we have with folks across the Northeast. So,
yeah, good stuff.
And of course, you're getting that from, the previous fire guy. Yes, Wendy, can you let Mike in? Mike McLaughlin. Anything
Chris,
else? Yeah.
Chris, if someone like Mike McLaughlin is late, don't we have a rule about him providing gifts to people, or
Next
Scotch
gathering, I have to buy the first round. Yes.
it's not something? There was something like that in the bylaws.
No, I think I remember that as well, John. I appreciate the reminder.
And did you just do that just to diss me? What was that? What?
No, but
What?
Yeah.
What was that?
All right, Tony, we're falling apart.
I was going to say, nobody thought of that other than John. And now that he said it, everyone thinks
Yeah. So we will welcome Mike McLaughlin from representing Albany County, and then we can move into the technical committee report with Mr. Gifford.
And Supervisor Barber just joined us as well.
Oh, great. Yes, welcome, Supervisor.
All right, let's move to Neil.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Mike, for that levity. Happy to see everybody. Happy autumn equinox coming up here in a few days. The technical committee has met twice this last quarter since we saw you in June, and we only met on Tuesday, so I don't have a report in front of you yet, but I'll get you that by the end of the week. Just finalizing that with Patty. But in total, we had 3 new projects that the technical committee has reviewed. Pretty much all of that activity is in the town of Colony. And one of those, 2 of them are in full protection areas. And the other one is in a non-protection area, an area that's already developed. There are some updates on some other projects, in particular in the town of Guilderland. And that's pretty much well covered in the news articles, the clippings that Patty put together for you in the packet, in particular related to the Cross Gates project and the the litigation there. Like I said, I'll get you the report by the end of the week. I'm happy to answer any questions you have, any of the projects that are ongoing, but I'll leave my report at that for now.
Thanks, Neil. Actually, I was going to add something in the media articles. There's there's some press in the media articles packet about those projects in Gilliland, so people can see what's going on. And I just want to thank both the town and the applicants that they came to us first before they even proposed things to work with us to try and balance things with Pine Bush conservation and economic development. And some of those articles are pretty interesting. Okay.
All right, thanks, Neil. Unless there are any other questions for Neil, Lisa, can you take us away?
Great to see everybody. Hopefully in person someday, right? All right, here we go. Okay, first report. These reports take us through July 31st, which is 4 months of our fiscal year. The statement of financial activities. On the revenue side, dues and contributions are slightly higher than budget. This is just due to quarterly trust go. Came in a little bit higher than we budgeted. Government grants and contracts. This is at 98% of budget, and this is directly reported to expenses below. We have conservative spending usually in the first quarter because the last quarter of our fiscal year, we usually have a little bit higher spending. Mitigation fees are slightly over budget, $1,700 through July, and this represents only 1 quarter of our fiscal year. Lease revenue is on budget, and other revenue is slightly higher in budget, and this is due to increase in merchandise sales in the Discovery Center now that we're open. So total revenue came in at 99% of budget through the month of July. On to expenses, personnel and fringe are at 90% of budget. And this mainly is due to a large benefit payment that we make in November to the New York State Retirement System. So this will catch up in November. That payment will be cash payment will be approximately $180,000. We just got our estimated invoice for the year. But our expense will be about 68. And it's just the difference between booking cash versus the direct expense on our income statement. So that'll catch up. Travel and training, $700 under budget. This is just due to less travel in the beginning of the year than anticipated across departments. Contractual is 94% of budget. And this mainly is $5,000. 3,500 of that is just the timing of IT invoices that were not paid yet. Communications is $2,900 under budget. And this is due to the timing of printing brochures, trail maps, and postage for our fire cards. Occupancy is slightly under budget, $1,100. This is the budget center for Discovery Center repairs and utilities. And this is where we base our repair needs. So it's just a little bit under through July. Supplies and equipment is $2,500 under budget. This is due to less program supplies and education Discovery Center supplies. And all other expenses are $1,300 under budget due to less gift shop purchases and timing of annual subscriptions. Giving our total expenses came in at 91% of budget through July 31st. So overall, both revenue and expenses came in under at 99% and 91%, giving us an operating surplus of $127,000. And you'll see, I put this, this is where we used to report. I put everything underneath so we can compare to our Paris reporting and our net operating income. So that 127 is our net operating income. And then below that, we will see our capital expenditures, which is our cash, which shows on our balance sheet of $14,000 versus $15,000 budgeted. This is for our security system. And non-cash operating revenues, this is where you will see depreciation, OPEB, and investments. So given that, non-cash surplus, $291,000, total net change in that position. So this would be our gain and our loss that show on our audited financials, would be $418,000 with our investments in there. And then the next line item, the last line item is our excess deficiencies, revenues over expenditures. This is our Paris reporting. So this is our OSC 5-year budget that we tie in, that we have to do by January 1st every year. So all these numbers kind of tie into something. I know it's a lot of information. If you look up the operating surplus income on top, 127, and how we use our cash, the operating cash flow, 112. That's a good indicator of where we are on that. Any questions on that? Okay. Moving on to the statement of net assets. We are slightly higher in cash. We received a payment for last year's expenses this year of $671,000 from DEC and a payment for last year's expenses of $32,000 for mitigation. Grants receivable are $103,000 higher. This is just due to, this is money owed from DEC for April through July. And as Chris said, we got great news today. The contract is approved. The vouchers have been with DEC. So she is estimating a 30-day time frame for turnaround for cash. So hopefully we'll see that by our next meeting. We should receive 2 payments on that. So that'll be great news. Accounts receivable increased slightly. This is just due to a little bit higher quarterly mitigation, and this has been paid. Inventory remained the same. Prepaid expenses are 0. This is the timing of last year's expenses. This will show up in March versus April. So this should be 0 throughout the year. Investments came in at $383,000 gain, and this is a positive performance in all 4 funds. Capital assets decreased $50,000 due to a depreciation expense of $92,000 in purchases throughout the year. And deferred outflows remain the same for the New York State retirement system again. We will make this journal entry in November when we make the payment, when we get our final bill, our invoice from the New York State retirement system. On the liability side, nothing really to report here. They stayed the same, $24 change, and accrued expenses. Deferred revenue remained the same, pension liability and OPEB remained the same. And I am working, I will be working with Milliman on that report for January for our OPEB liability. In conjunction in December, we usually at the December meeting choose a 3%, 4%, or 5% payment to take out of the endowment over the average years. So we'll that'll be all be timing for our January financials. So total liabilities $24 ahead of last year. And the net asset side, capital assets decreased $50,000. Just like above, we had $92,000 in depreciation expense, and then some additions this year. Reserved assets decreased $9,000, and this is due to the county mitigation being utilized. Unreserved assets increased $477,000, giving us a total increase of net assets of $418,000. This is made up of our operating surplus of $127,000, our increase in investments of $383,000, and our depreciation expense of $92,000. Any questions on that? Okay. All great news so far. Investment summary. All 4 funds came in with a gain. Specifically, the reserve fund gained $108,000. The Discovery Center endowment, $8,000. The endowment gained $243,000. And the OPEB reserves gained $24,000, giving us a total of $383,000 through the month of July. Any questions? Thank you all.
Thank you, Lisa.
Thanks, Lisa.
So I think that brings us to our 4 action items for today's meeting. And the first action item is the re-election of 3 officers, Elaine Chinian as vice chair, Donald Cepas as secretary, and John Brust as treasurer. Is there any discussion on this proposed resolution? Can I get a motion for adopting the resolution of re-election for these officers?
So moved.
Second. Oh, a lot of seconds. I'm happy to do that. A second. All in
Okay.
favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, motion carries. Congratulations to the three officers. Moving on to our next action item, we have a multi-year contract to adopt. Chris, can you tell us a little bit about this contract?
Sure. So the first one is for Italian Global Services. They're a janitorial contractor. This would be the third year that we've worked with them. So we extended them last year, 1 year. This is another extension for a third year. They do well. And their price increased by about 2.8%, which is pretty reasonable given all the expense associated with products and things like paper products and cleaning supplies. And the second one is for Eastern Heating and Cooling. Eastern provides all of our HVAC services outside of the electronic controls. So they run our boilers, our chiller, our cooling tower, basically heating and cooling. They have managed this building since before we were here, when Sept was here. They do a great job. They used to do just 1 year contracts, and they went up this year just like everybody else because of materials. So I asked Blake, our Discovery Center manager, to go back to them and ask if they would lock in for a 3-year contract. And they said, no, how about 2? And I said, that's good. So this is usually a 1 year contract, but we were able to secure it for 2. So this increased over last year by about 10%. That's due to inflation, of course, but also they're cleaning it, or they're changing out our filters more often because, like many places due to COVID, we put filters with a higher MERV value, a higher filtration value. So of course, higher filtration value means you have to change filters more often. And that's kind of a summary. And they both follow this resolution. If you wanted to look at any of the detail, there's the amendment for Italian, which is 2 pages. And then there's the contract excluding both the appendices, the standard appendices for the state and for the commission.
All right, thanks for that, Chris.
Yes.
I don't have any questions on that unless anyone else does. Can we have a motion to adopt this resolution approving both of these contracts?
I'll make that motion.
I'll second. Oh.
We got Steve. We'll go Mike and Steve. How's that? Okay.
All right. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Any opposed? Carries. Thank you. The third action item is the revised operating budget for 2021 to 22.
Okay. So again, we were fortunate enough, Tyler Briggs, working together with Neil Gifford, we secured $150,000 from the U.S. Forest Service for this program called a Wildfire Risk Reduction Grant Program. And it's used in areas that are fire dependent systems like ours to reduce the chance of wildfire and promote the use of prescribed fire. So we're using these funds primarily for habitat manipulation prior to fire, mowing, herbicide work, basically all in prep for fire management. This is a $150,000 grant. I'll show it to you in the budget itself. And it's directly, it will be spent as contracts by the end of this fiscal year. The second addition is $483,029 of rollover funds from the last 5-year contract. So I mentioned at the beginning that we just secured our new 5-year contract, or it's signed. The contract that we just ended March 31st of 2021, there was $483,000 in change of unspent funds from what was appropriated. Most of that was not spent last year due to COVID. And on top of that, there was money that was rolling over from year 4 into year 5, COVID year, which totaled $483,000. So after a lot of work on Lisa's part and less so on my part, working with management and budget and DEC, we were able to secure those funds. I didn't think we were actually going to get them. So they are coming to us as a cash payment. But with the fact that we have 6 months left in a fiscal year, it's not prudent to spend those funds because there's been no planning for it. Yet we have to show it on our budget. So we talked about this pretty extensively at the audit committee last Friday. So here, if you look, here's the addition of the $150,000 for that Forest Service grant. Here's that 483,000. So that 150 for the habitat manipulation for fire comes right out of here, out of contracts. But we created a whole new line here. It says contractual rollover EPF because DEC, management and budget, wants to see it in this budget. That's fine, but we're not going to spend it. And the audit committee, like I said, discussed this pretty thoroughly and agreed that it's prudent not to spend it, but we will use it over the next 4-year period in this contract. So it's nice to have the money. It's just a little atypical, I would say. So with that said, we have to update our new the budget impact statement. This is a new requirement that we have as of this year from the comptroller's office. It's a section of their regulations for public authorities. So if you change your budget, if you have income coming in, you're going to expend it, you have to update that. You have to put it in front of the board, and the board has to approve it along with any other changes in the amended budget. So this is showing that $150,000 for that federal grant award, income and expense. The 483 is not there because we're not going to spend it. That's a long-winded explanation, but I wanted to make sure that everybody had that because it's kind of where we landed with the audit committee. That said, we're working with staff already as of yesterday with a pre-budget meeting, thinking about how can we use some of those funds now, or not now, starting next fiscal year, starting April 1st of 2022. So that's already in process. So that's a long-winded rundown of the addition of 150 plus $483,029 into the budget for this fiscal year, which ends March 31st.
Chris, I've got a question.
Yes.
Is that the 483,000 is 100,000? Is that earmarked for contractual only, or could you decide at some point you could spend it on equipment or supplies or something like that?
We can really spend it on anything. We just created that line, and that was actually recommended by DEC, management and budget. Just create a line and show that it's being expended, and that's the easiest place to put it. My guess is based on the conversation we had with the audit committee, here's an opportunity to invest in some capital projects and more habitat work, which are usually the most expensive. And that doesn't mean that we couldn't use it for supplies or equipment. But, we had this conversation, we'll get more into that, of the consideration of the improvements to the Discovery Center trail behind the Discovery Center here, which is supposed to be ADA compliant, but we've been working with Delaware Engineering to improve that and even consider maybe extending that to the overlook. So folks who are mobilely challenged can have an opportunity not just to do a short loop, but can actually get up to a vista and see things and see more of the pine bush. So that's the kind of stuff we're looking at. And of course, Joel Hecht could spend all of it on invasives control and planting.
Yeah.
So we'll probably balance it out. And you'll see that. I mean, that'll be super clear in a proposed budget. That proposed budget is coming to you next month already. Are there other questions for me? Okay.
And we have a motion to adopt this resolution for these 2 revisions to the operating budget.
I'll make that motion. It's Peter.
Thank you, Peter.
I'll second.
Nancy?
All in favor?
Aye.
And any opposed? Motion.
Thank you.
So the next and last action item we have on the agenda is the consideration of 3 new policies for staff at the center. And I've reviewed them, but Chris, do you want to give a kind of high-level overview of what we're trying to accomplish with these 3 policies?
Sure. The resolution says that they're going to be added to the employee and volunteer policies and procedures. Obviously, the remote worker / telecommuting policy is not for volunteers, but the other 2 are child abuse prevention and communicable disease management. So we have P&Ps for our volunteers and our employees, and they're reflective of one another. Obviously, those that don't apply to a volunteer are excluded. So the telecommuting policy is, we adopted a telecommuting policy that was prepared for us by the HR company that we use, Pinnacle Human Resources, along with the communicable disease management policy. When COVID first hit, going all the way back to the spring of 20, these were requirements for an organization like ours. So we adopted them. But the telecommuting policy was basically, it was recognizing capacity limits for space, which we no longer have. And then there was a number of other limitations. So we created a new telecommuting policy, remote worker telecommuting policy, working with Bond, Shonick and King, one of the law firms that we use. And that's the result of that is what you see. And then there's an application that staff would have to fill out that's reviewed and approved by their supervisor, their department director, and then me. Child abuse prevention policy. This came up because we don't have one. And come to find out, most of our peers don't have this on the books, which I found a little surprising. So again, we worked with our insurance carrier, who put us in touch with a company that produces these kinds of materials, worked with our attorney to then take that information and put it into a policy that applies to us. And this is because we work with minors. We have minors that are volunteers. We work with minors all the time. And it's the right thing to do, the right thing to have on the books. Communicable disease policy. This is just an update from the one that we adopted from Pinnacle Human Resources back at the beginning of COVID, but it needed to be updated, and it really needs to be in our policies and procedures. So in the past, when we do modest updates to our P&Ps, we don't show that to the board. I usually just report on them, but these are big policies, so I wanted the board to see them. So it's kind of a summary of them all.
Thanks, Chris. On the telecommuting policy, does the commission reserve the right to cancel a telecommuting arrangement with any particular staff member at any time for
Yep.
no reason?
Yeah. It's basically, it's presented pretty clearly that it's a privilege, and it's not a right as any employee. It'd be any situation, if we realized, we had an employee that was telecommuting 1 day a week, and that position really needed to be here that 1 day a week, perhaps the day could be switched or not. They may have to be fully present. So yes.
And are those arrangements made kind of on a weekly basis looking forward, or monthly, or is it subject to supervisor discretion?
The latter. It's subject to supervisor discretion. Yep.
And the child abuse policy, that includes cautionary requirements as well as reporting requirements. Basically, like those are the 2 kind of rules for what to avoid or what to look for. And then if anyone receives notification of anything that might be a concern, it includes reporting requirements.
It does. One thing to note in that there are reporting requirements, but the one thing to note is our staff do not fall under the law of mandatory reporters, like daycare may be, or healthcare situations. However, there's a clear reporting requirement in it.
And with communicable disease, there's a new proposed mandate for staff members who have symptoms of what could be a communicable disease to notify supervisors of those symptoms.
That's correct, right here. Any person with symptoms of a suspected or confirmed communicable disease.
Okay.
Yep.
Thanks. Are there any other questions or comments on any of these three policies from the board?
How are these amended if we need to?
How do we amend them if we need to?
Yes.
We can amend them at any time.
Okay, so there's nothing mandatory or anything like that that we have to worry about.
No, so for example, if something came out of the Department of Health that would just using them as an example, that would impact any of these policies, they would have to be updated. They would have to be edited. Yep. That's what you're asking, right, Harvey?
Yes.
Yeah. Yep.
And the board would have to vote on that? Or is there a provision that allows the executive director to make amendments pursuant to local regulations?
The bylaws basically give me that authority.
Okay, great.
I mean, and these, like I said, even these policies don't have to be approved by the board. I just think it's appropriate given where we are and what the significance of these policies, since they're new. And Jess, if that happened, I would most likely report to the board via email and certainly at the next upcoming board meeting.
Great.
And I would like to flag also that the proposed resolution that we'll consider in a moment includes language about adopting these policies in substantially the same form as presented in the board packet. So if there's a need for correction to typographical errors or punctuation or formatting or non-material, non-substantive changes, that would not necessarily need to be re-elevated to the board before those changes can be made. But of course, if there are any substantive changes, it would go back to what Chris just described.
Yeah, thanks, Tony. That's right. Because as you can see, these are pretty hot off the press. So you can see they're in different fonts, they're different size fonts. So they need to be modified so they're compatible with our document, our employee handbook.
And what I just said was not meant to insinuate that there were any typographical errors, but if any,
there shouldn't be, but I know the fonts are different.
are there any other comments or questions on these policies? Can we have a motion to adopt this resolution?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you. And that concludes our action items for this meeting. So thank you, everyone. So let's move to the highlights, which are the staff presentations.
So we have Jesse up first.
And Jesse, it looks like you're still on mute, just so you know.
All right, there we go. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
All right, and is the screen sharing, does the technology work out here?
Looks good.
I can see it.
Good stuff. All right, so yeah, thanks for inviting me to speak. I'm going to talk to you a little bit today about Virginia marble seed. It's the state endangered plant that I discovered in the preserve this past June. Lithospermum virginianum is its scientific name. And the picture that you see there is a sort of a close-up of what it looks like. So I thought I would start by just talking a little bit about rarity to get everyone on the same page. So biological rarity is ranked in New York State by the New York Natural Heritage Program. And the scale basically goes from 1 to 5, with 1 being the most rare and 5 being the most common. And then that's also broken down into two parts. So there's a state ranking. So how does the species fare within the boundaries of New York State? And then there's a global ranking. So how does the species fare within the entirety of its global range? So if we just focus in on the New York State for now, an S1 species typically has 5 or fewer occurrences. This is like the rarest of the rare. So the species that I discovered, this Virginia marble seed, is an S1 species, and most S1 species are considered endangered in the state. S2, a little bit more abundant, but still you're talking less than 20 occurrences. Those are generally regarded as threatened. S3, between 20 and 100 occurrences. These are things that definitely need to be watched out for, but they haven't declined to the point where they're threatened. And then S4 and S5 are things that are more secure, more common within the state. So I'm focused on plants here as preserve student botanist, and we have 5 S1 ranked plants on our plant list. None of those species have been seen within 20 or more years, including this one. These are the other 4 species that are not in the Lithospermum. So we've got Carex straminea. This is a sedge, and there are some limitations to the plant list that I inherited, which came from Jeff Barnes' Natural History of the Albany Pine Bush. There's not a lot of metadata associated with that book. So, there are things on there like this Carex that New York Natural Heritage Program has no record of it being in the pine bush area. But these other 3 species, Polygonum caryi, was last observed in 1955. There's no specific location information for that. Poa paludogena does have specific location information, last observed in 1990. It was surveyed for in 97 and was not located at that time. And then Melaxus bayardii is a small terrestrial orchid. This was last observed in 1997. It's been surveyed for extensively by both New York Natural Heritage staff and by myself, and has not been seen since 97. But one thing that you'll probably notice about these plants is that, we've got a sedge, a grass, and a polygonum. These are all massive plant groups with individuals that look really similar. So, you look at that grass, and if you let your lawn get a little long, you've probably got things coming up in it that look a lot like that. So, these are things that take significant expertise and significant attention to detail to even be able to identify in the first place. So, they're cryptic, they require technical expertise. So it's possible that some of these things are still hanging on in some area in the preserve or elsewhere, but they're just hard to detect. So that's an issue with these kinds of plant species. This is what the Lithospermum looks like in its habitat. So again, if you're out there walking through the preserve, you would likely walk right by this thing. And even I, as a trained botanist, would walk by it if I wasn't right next to it. It just doesn't have anything that's so showy about it that from 20 feet away you would notice. In digging into the data on this species, it turns out that it's quite rare in the Northeast. So this is a map that I pulled from NatureServe. It's a TNC spinoff that does a great job compiling conservation information. And what you'll notice in looking at this, this shows all the state rankings for the known range. So any state that's highlighted there is within the range of this plant species. And you'll notice that down in the Southeast, in Georgia, we've got secure populations of the plant. And then as you work your way north, it gets more and more and more rare. So what that tells you is that this is a southern species, and we are right at the northern edge of its range. So the states in dark gray, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, and Delaware, all had this species historically, but they are considered extirpated for now. The states in red have critically imperiled S1 populations, Virginia S2, North Carolina S3, and it's really not until you get to the southeast that you start to see this plant become abundant. So I thought that was pretty cool. That this is really quite a rare species in the entirety of the Northeast. So this is what the plant looked like when I discovered it. And the story of discovery was that I was out there with my staff doing wild blue lupin seed collection, which we do every year. And when you're out there, you've got a big bag, you're collecting seeds, your mind can wander. It takes a lot of physical energy, but not a ton of mental acuity to figure out how to collect seed. So, I was just wandering out there collecting seed, thinking about plants, which is what I do for fun. And I happened to put my seed bag down right here. You can see my seed bag right next to this plant. So it was really kind of just serendipitous that I happened to be right next to this, and also serendipitous that I didn't crush it under my heavy bag of seeds. But I saw this thing, and there were two things that drew my eye. So the first thing is that if you look at the shape of the inflorescence, which is the stalk that has all the flowers on it, you'll notice that it makes this spiral shape. So this is something that's characteristic of the Boraginaceae family. And that's something that I knew. And Boraginaceae is only represented in New York State by 15 native species. So not a family that you're going to see really abundantly out there. So I noticed that right away. The shape is called the Scorpioid sign, which I thought was kind of cool. Scorpioid, probably coming from scorpion-like, right? So just kind of a neat shape that drew my eye. And then the other thing was that the arrangement of the venation in the leaves. So typically leaf veins go something like this. You've got a central point and branching that heads out towards the edges of the leaves in that fashion. But you'll notice in this species, the side lateral branches more or less become parallel with the main vein by the time they get to the end of the leaf. And while that's not indicative or characteristic of any particular family, it's something that's less common botanically. So those two things are really what, in looking at this, I was like, wow, this is something unique. And I guess the other piece of it is that I know most of the plants on site that I see in the pine bush, and this was something I didn't know. So that alone was enough to bring it to my attention. And once I had noticed those things, I started looking into it, keying it out through technical manuals. And it turns out that this flower shape is really distinctive also. So you've got, it's hard to, in looking at it from a distance, it's hard to even know what the flowers are, but the flowers are these sort of white tubular shapes. It's got a tube-shaped flower, and the petals are tightly oppressed, almost closing in on the style, which protrudes out of the flower. So there's these pointy little tiny petals here, fused flower tube, and the protruding styles, and all of those things combined don't have any lookalikes really. So this was definitely Lithospermum virginianum, the Virginia marble seed. So I excitedly got in touch with the New York Natural Heritage Program's chief botanist, Steve Young, and he was able to confirm that in fact that is what we were looking at here. And it kind of rippled through the plant world. There's only one other existing population in New York State. It's from this site in Dutchess County. This is an inland red cedar barrens. So sort of structurally similar to pine barrens. You've got open field, you've got shrubs, you've got a sparse overstory. But the substrate here is quite a bit different. So this is calcareous soils with exposed bedrock. Vastly different from our deep sandy soils. The population here consists of about 20 individual plants, and it's been stable for many years. But this was the only known location until this discovery in the preserve, the only known location in New York State. There are about 20 historical records, mostly from the late 1800s and early 1900s, and most of those are from open disturbed areas on Long Island and the New York City area, where it was found in open sandy sites. And our population is the northernmost outlier. So it was last observed in the hamlet of Carner in 1923. So about 98 years ago, almost 100 years ago, this plant has either been not detected or not present in the preserve. And this is what the seeds look like. I went back out to the site recently, and I was excited to see that the plant had set seed. And I collected these 25 seeds here. So now we've got to kind of figure out what to do next. So I'm working with Steve Young, the botanist from New York Natural Heritage. I'm working with my colleagues here on staff, and we sort of need to talk about what we're going to do next with this. There are only 2 plants in one location in the preserve right now. So that's, that makes me nervous. Obviously all the work that we've been doing, habitat management work that we've been doing has enabled us to both detect this plant and has enabled this plant to thrive. The 2 plants that are there are really healthy and really, really good looking. They set good seed this year. So those are positives. But keeping that habitat optimal for these 2 plants is something that's going to be important. And then, looking into expanding both the number of individuals in the known population and then potentially creating more populations elsewhere in the preserve are things that we're going to talk about. So, having, we have lots of optimal habitat at this point, lots of sites. This was in the Barrens, right out behind the Discovery Center, right along 155, about 50 yards off of the Yellow Trail. So there's lots of habitat that we have that looks similar to that at this point because we've done such good habitat restoration work. So those are all things kind of to be determined what we're kind of doing going forward. If anyone has any questions, I'd be happy to take them.
Thanks, Jesse. Just one quick question. Are you planning to draw the public's attention to the 2 particular plants that are currently present, or will you be hiding them in plain sight?
I think at this point it's probably unwise to do that, though. I think that given the way that the plant looks, there's little danger of people taking an interest to poach it or something. It's not like a spectacular orchid or something. But I think that it is off trail, and we wouldn't want to draw people off trail into the habitat probably anyway. So I think at this point it's probably just hiding in plain sight is fine. It's difficult to find. I actually went out and marked like the locations so that I could find them again next year because they are so cryptic in the habitat.
Do they reproduce vegetatively?
I don't know. That's a good question. And I'm not sure. I've kind of had my feelers out to a bunch of my botanical colleagues throughout the Southeast to sort of figure out what's known about this plant. Because it's so rare in the Northeast, nobody knows much about it up here. So so I have questions out there, feelers out there, I guess, but I don't have any information right now.
Jesse, just a quick question. Is this something that's found on soils that were fairly stable, or is it in a place where you guys have kind of done a fairly wholesale job at restoring a community, or do we think that the soils here have been fairly undisturbed for a while?
I would say fairly undisturbed. This is an area that has always been barrens. So we've done a lot of work as far as making sure that we're mowing and burning and sort of maintaining it. But this is not a restoration site. This is an area that's always been barrens.
Thanks. It's very exciting. I'm sure it's been a real highlight of your career to find something like that. So congratulations.
Yeah, for sure. And it was cool to get a lot of press. Hopefully you guys have read some of the articles or you saw some of them. But like I said in there, this is I've been looking for rare plants for my whole life, and the nature of looking for rare plants is that you don't find them because they're rare. So it was really an exciting thing. And I had an inkling that this might be what it was right from when I first put that seed bag down. So it really is quite an exciting thing. All right, well, thanks so much.
Congratulations, Jesse.
Yeah, kudos,
Thank
Jesse.
you.
Great job.
Thank you, Jesse. That was great.
All right, next up, the next presentation on hummingbird banning. I'll turn it to you, Chris, to introduce.
Yeah. So this is, so we have Dylan, Amanda Dylan, who doesn't like to be called Amanda Dylan, right, Dylan? We're going to hand it off to you.
All right.
Tell us about your training.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody. So, are you seeing the PowerPoint?
Yep.
We are.
All right, good. Okay. So this is a ruby-throated hummingbird. It's the smallest bird that we're likely to encounter in the Northeast. And we capture them at our bird banding stations, both during the breeding season and during fall migration. So we catch on average about 9 a year, sometimes as many as 19. This year we've already caught 9, both at our summer banding station and so far with our fall migration station. And because they are so small, they require a different permit from the feds and the state to ban them. And so in the interest of being able to band these incidental captures at our banding stations here in the preserve, and also in the interest of some future research that we might want to do with this species, I attended a workshop to get trained up to get banned these species with the hope that we'll be able to add them to our permit moving forward. So they are a very small bird. They look much smaller in Neil's hand here. So in order to get trained up, I went in early August to a workshop down in West Virginia. This was established by a bird bander in the South, Bob Sargent. And he just works with these people in their backyards who set up feeders. So we went to 3 different locations in West Virginia. And these were just people who liked to feed hummingbirds, and over the years have added the number of feeders. So these people have between 30 and 40 feeders set up in their backyards. So obviously for catching the hummingbirds for this workshop, it was more of a targeted approach than the passive netting that we do here. So in order to catch them, we would take down most of these feeders and put up a trap, which you can kind of see in the back here. This is a 3-bay trap, and you hang the feeders inside of this trap. And the hummingbirds come in to get more food from the feeders, and the traps have a little trigger door on them that are connected with a fishing line to these little just fishing reels here. And when enough birds are in the trap, you just kind of toggle that fishing line to close the door, and then you go and extract the birds. So this is a little bit of a close-up showing the hummingbirds kind of going into that feeder. So each one of these feeders is inside of a little cage with a door on the front. So we used these more active traps. We also used some passive traps where apparently ruby-throated hummingbirds in particular aren't super smart. They'll fly into an open door in a passive trap, and then they can't find the exit. So we also used some passive traps. This is just to give you an idea of, this was the 3rd site that we went to, just to give you an idea of the number of hummingbirds that we're talking about. So over the course of the workshop, we banded over 500, and that's just over 3 days at these 3 different sites. So these people are established way stations for these birds on their migration pathways, and they get thousands of these that fly through. So a lot of efforts that are concentrated on banding ruby-throated hummingbirds or hummingbirds in general really focus on these kind of feeding stations, these hot spots for where they stop during migration. So here are some of the hummingbirds being waiting to be processed. So the nice thing about this method is they just ate. So they are very small birds. They have very high metabolism. So you do sometimes have to worry about them needing energy before you get a chance to process them. But these guys have all just eaten, and you'll see we have a feeder right here at the table. So if any bird seems like they're getting a little lethargic or a little stressed, we can give them a drink right before we band them or after we band them. So there were 3 participants in the workshop this year. It was Kyle, Anthony, and then Fred here. Fred Dietrich has taken over the training. Bob Sargent died in 2014. So Fred worked with him for many years. And so now he runs this training. So the 3 of us were it was on that first day, we did some observations and then we kind of jumped in pretty quick into banding these. So these are the bands for ruby-throated hummingbirds. They are very different than the bands we get for our other birds because they actually are delivered in kind of a sheet almost of aluminum foil. The bands are so small that you actually cut them yourself. And you kind of cut them into strips and then they have to be shaped into the round shape and they have to be trimmed depending on the species. So the ruby-throated is one of the smaller species. It's not the smallest, and there's actually about a 0.5 millimeter difference between the band sizes for males and females. So you can also trim them a little bit depending on whether the bird is a male or a female. So we did get some experience in trimming and shaping the bands. And when we're ready to put them on the bird, you actually push the band onto a tapestry needle or a very small knitting needle to open it up. And then we have the pliers here, very similar to the banding pliers that we use at our banding station, just much, much smaller. Then you can actually just pull the little leg up and put the band on. So it's very similar to passerine banding, except the bird is teeny tiny. So in addition to banding the birds, we took a number of measurements, including wing chord, the exposed culmen, which is the length of the bill. We did a tail length, and we also looked to see if there was any fat on the birds, which we were pretty early in migration. And some of these birds, if they've just arrived, don't have a whole lot of fat on them. It's something you see maybe later in the season, but I did get to see some very plump hummingbirds, and they looked like little yellow water balloons. So that's Fred and I sitting at our first location. This picture I like to call, these aren't the droids you're looking for. To process the hummingbirds, we actually put them in the toe of a stocking or a pantyhose. And that just allows you to control the bird, keeps them kind of calm while you're handling them. And if you just tuck the head and the tail inside of that little stocking, you can actually just pull the leg up, and that's how we put the band on. So this is the band on the bird you can see here. And we'd read the bands before we put them on, but we do get recaptures. So it is tricky to read those bands because they are so small and they don't fit as many digits on the band as they do on other passerine bands. So there's a letter and 5 numbers on each band. We found with some of the recaptures that the females, especially because they construct their nests with spider webs, that they would have spider webs kind of tucked around the band. So we always had a pair of forceps or a small pair of scissors with us in case we needed to clean off the area around the band. So this is all of us at our last location. That's the second video I showed you that had so many hummingbirds. So that was a very productive day. You can see all the hummingbirds waiting here to be processed. And these are some of the birds that we captured. So this is a real handsome male ruby-throated hummingbird, showing you that reason for that name, that nice ruby throat. This is also a male, but this is what we call a hatch year. So he was born this year. And he's lucky he's got one gorget feather that's come in on his little throat. Next year, he will put in more of those and he'll have that full red throat that the adult males have. But that one gorget feather identifies this as a hatch year bird. These are 2 female ruby-throated hummingbirds. The one on the right here is a young bird, a hatch year bird. You can see she's much more dingy on her throat versus the cleaner white throat on the older. We call this one an after hatch year. So those are 2 females. We also caught birds that were in the process of molting and looked pretty ratty. So this is an adult male that's in the process of molting his body feathers. So all these little white kind of sticks that you see are the feathers coming in. When the feathers come in, they have a shaft around them. So it's called a pin feather when they're first growing in. And as they grow out, that shaft falls off from around the feather. So this guy was still growing in, and this guy too is still growing in some of their body feathers while on the move. And this is just a video to show you the structural nature of those ruby gorget feathers on the throat. So structural meaning that they really change color depending on how the light is hitting them. So to the side, his throat just kind of looks dark black, maybe green. And then when the light hits it just right, you get that nice flash of ruby. So over the course of this workshop, I banded 146 ruby-throated hummingbirds, and I processed 11 recaptures, one of which was very exciting. She was over 8 years old, and she was caught at that same station in 2018 and 2019. So they do get really established patterns. They have high site fidelity for these places during migration. And it was a very valuable experience. And I hope that now we'll be able to apply for our permits and get these added to our permit so that we can not only band incidental captures here in the Pine Bush from our regular banding efforts, but also maybe look into these guys a little bit deeper in the preserve. And so I want to thank the commission, but also the workshop was really supported by the Friends of the Pine Bush community. They kind of funded the trip for me. So super appreciative of that. And yeah, it was a really valuable experience, and looking forward to putting it into use here at the preserve.
Thanks, Amanda.
That's great.
Thank you, Dylan.
Thank you. That was wonderful.
No problem.
In that first picture you showed of Neil's hand, how was he keeping the bird in his open palm without it flying away?
Oh, so a lot of times the birds, especially if they're on their back, they kind of don't know that they can fly away a lot of times. And so one of the ways that we release them is to put them on their backs and just kind of roll them forward. And sometimes even then they still don't know that they're free. So sometimes they'll just sit in your hand for a little bit, and sometimes you actually have to blow on them, and then they wake up and realize that they can go.
Ellen, how many incidental captures would you get in a typical year, say in the Pine Bush?
Well, on average from 2011 through 2020, it's about 9 birds. In 2018, that was our peak year. We had 19. We captured 19. And this year so far with our summer banding station in fall, we're at 9. Any other questions?
Questions for Dylan? Dylan, I'm so proud to see that almost every photo of you've got some kind of uniform on. Hat, t-shirt, all kinds of good stuff. It's like marketing.
Yeah, gotta represent.
Gotta represent. And I'll just echo to thank the Friends for supporting this opportunity for Dylan. It was a pretty cool opportunity, that's for sure. And certainly to great benefit to us and our science work here.
Yes.
Okay.
Thank
Right.
you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Dylan.
Thanks, Dylan.
So I think we're at that point of the agenda where we have it open for any other business.
Nancy, what's your cat's name?
It's Smudge. She's got a little smudge in front of her face.
That's great.
There's another one sitting in a basket up there that's Pirate. She's got a little pirate.
Tony, I can share one thing with my screen.
Sure.
Well, maybe I can't. Okay, I can't. Well, what I was going to do is share a picture of the annual report that Wendy Craney, our communications director, finished up so we could have it for this meeting. She worked with our department directors and other staff to put the highlights together. So I will email that out after the meeting. And I'll also put a plug in for the Friends. I'll send a link to our webpage that has the link to their work. And if you are interested in supporting them or your friends or anybody, it supports things like the work that Dylan just talked about. That's all I have.
I don't have anything else. Does anyone else have any other business? So our next meeting is December 16th at 9:30. And as we get closer to that, we'll determine whether it's strictly by Zoom or it's in person or it's a hybrid. I think it's
Indeed.
to say. All right. Can we have a motion to adjourn?
I'll make that.
Second.
Okay, see everybody.
All right. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks,
Bye.
everyone.